I never thought I would be the guy who cared about homeowner association meetings. But when you watch your neighborhood dues vanish into thin air while the HOA president drives up in a brand new Mercedes, you start paying attention real quick. My name is Michael Patterson, and I bought my house in Riverside Meadows, a planned community just outside Phoenix, Arizona, 3 years ago. The place seemed perfect at first. Clean streets, maintained common areas, a nice pool and fitness center. The HOA dues were steep at $350 a month, but I figured that was the price you paid for living somewhere decent. I work as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, so I know my way around financial statements. That knowledge would end up being the thing that unraveled the biggest fraud scheme our county had seen in decades. It started innocently enough on a Tuesday evening in late March. I was grilling burgers in my backyard when my neighbor Tom walked over with a beer in his hand and a concerned look on his face. Tom was a retired police officer from Chicago who moved out here for the weather, and he was not the type to get worked up over nothing. "Mike, you got a minute?" he asked, leaning against my fence. "Sure, what's going on?" I was looking at the HOA financial report they sent out last week. Something doesn't add up. The reserve fund shows we have about $200,000, but last year it was at almost $800,000. Where did 600 grand go? I flipped my burgers and wiped my hands on my apron. Did they do some major repairs or something? That's what I thought, but the expenditure report doesn't show anything that big. Just the usual landscaping, pool maintenance, that kind of thing. The numbers don't make sense. Tom handed me the report, and I scanned through it while my burgers sizzled. He was right. The expenses listed were all routine, maybe totaling $150,000 for the year. Even accounting for administrative costs and utilities, we should have had way more money in reserve. Our community had 240 homes, all paying $350 a month. That was over $1 million a year in revenue, and most of it seemed to just disappear. "I'll take a closer look at this," I told him. "Maybe there's an explanation we are missing." But the more I dug into those financial statements over the next few days, the worse it looked. I pulled out the reports from the previous 3 years and started building spreadsheets. The pattern was clear. Every year, our reserve fund decreased by hundreds of thousands of dollars, but there were no major capital improvements to show for it. The money was just gone. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, something I had never bothered with before. They were held on the third Thursday of every month in the community center at 7 in the evening. When I walked in that Thursday, there were maybe 15 other homeowners scattered around the room. Most people did not care enough to show up to these things, which I was starting to realize was part of the problem. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. There was Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an attitude that screamed she thought she was better than everyone else. Next to her sat Richard Bloom, the treasurer, a nervous-looking guy in his 60s who kept adjusting his glasses. Then there was Donna Marshall, the secretary, who seemed more interested in her phone than the meeting. Rounding out the board were 2 other members, Gary Phillips and Susan Chen, who barely said anything the entire time. Patricia called the meeting to order and launched into her usual speech about keeping our community beautiful and maintaining property values. She spent 15 minutes talking about a new regulation requiring all mailboxes to be a specific shade of bronze. I waded through the minutiae until we got to the financial report. Richard stood up and cleared his throat. The financial report for last month shows we collected $98,000 in dues. Expenses totaled $82,000, primarily for landscaping and pool maintenance. Our reserve fund currently stands at $193,000. I raised my hand. Patricia looked at me with barely concealed annoyance. Yes, you in the back. Michael Patterson on Sycamore Drive. I had a question about the reserve fund. Last year at this time, the report showed we had nearly $800,000 in reserves. Can you explain where that money went? Patricia's smile tightened. We have had several necessary expenditures over the past year. It is all documented in the reports. I have read the reports, I said, standing up so everyone could hear me clearly. The documented expenses do not account for $600,000. That is a huge discrepancy. Richard fumbled with his papers. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. Mr. Patterson, I can assure you that every penny is accounted for. If you have specific questions, you can schedule a meeting with the treasurer. I am asking specific questions right now. Where did the money go? A few other homeowners started murmuring. Tom, sitting next to me, nodded in support. Patricia's face was turning red. This is not the time or place for baseless accusations. We will move on to the next item on the agenda. I am not making accusations. I am asking for transparency. We all pay a lot of money in dues and we deserve to know where it goes. Patricia slammed her gavel on the table. We will move on, Mr. Patterson. You are out of order. I sat down, but I could see I had planted seeds of doubt. Several homeowners came up to me after the meeting, expressing similar concerns. Tom introduced me to a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to the board member, who worked as a forensic accountant for a bank. I have been suspicious for a while, Sarah told me as we stood in the parking lot. My husband and I moved here 2 years ago and the dues keep going up, but the amenities keep getting worse. The pool furniture is falling apart, the landscaping looks terrible, and they keep saying there is no money for improvements. Would you be willing to look at the financial statements with me? I asked. I know numbers, but fraud investigation is not really my specialty. Absolutely, this smells really wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I spent hours going through every document we could get our hands on. The HOA was required by Arizona law to provide financial records to homeowners upon request, though Patricia tried to stonewall us at every turn. She claimed documents were stored off-site, that we needed to submit written requests, that there were privacy concerns. But we persisted, and eventually we got access to 3 years of bank statements, invoices, and expense reports. What we found was staggering. There were dozens of payments to companies that did not seem to exist. Sarah started running down the names, checking business registrations with the Arizona Corporation Commission. Most of them were not registered at all. A few were registered to addresses that turned out to be empty lots or parking garages. These are shell companies, Sarah explained as we sat in my dining room surrounded by papers. Look at this. A payment for $50,000 to Sunshine Landscape Solutions for tree trimming. But there is no company by that name registered in Arizona, and look at the date. That was in December when no one trims trees. I pulled up another invoice. Here is one for $75,000 to Premier Pool Services for equipment upgrades. But I go to the pool 3 times a week. They have not upgraded anything. The same broken locker has been busted for 6 months. And check out the signatures on these invoices. They are all approved by Patricia or Richard, every single one. We kept digging. The more we found, the more obvious it became that this was systematic theft. Patricia and Richard had been funneling HOA money into fake companies for years. We estimated the total theft at over $1.2 million. We need to go to the police, I said. Sarah nodded. This is way beyond HOA drama. This is federal wire fraud, probably money laundering. We should contact the FBI. The next morning, I called the Phoenix FBI field office. I explained the situation to a receptionist who sounded appropriately skeptical at first. But when I mentioned the dollar amount and that we had documentation, She transferred me to an agent named Daniel Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez listened to my summary and asked us to come in that afternoon. Sarah and I showed up at the FBI office on North Central Avenue with 2 bankers' boxes full of documents. We spent 3 hours walking Agent Rodriguez and his partner, Agent Lisa Chang, through everything we had found. "This is solid work," Agent Rodriguez said, flipping through the invoices. "You basically did half our job for us. We will need to verify everything, run down these shell companies, get banking records." "But if this is what it looks like, you are talking about significant federal crimes. How long will an investigation take?" Sarah asked. "These things can take months." "We need to build an airtight case, but we will move as quickly as we can." Agent Chang leaned forward. "In the meantime, you cannot tell anyone about this. If the suspects realize they are under investigation, they might destroy evidence or flee. Can you keep this quiet?" I thought about all my neighbors who were being robbed. "How long do we have to wait?" "A few months at most. We will put a rush on this given the amount of money involved and the fact that the fraud is ongoing." Tom was the only person I told, and only because he had started this whole thing. He was thrilled that we had gone to the FBI, but he was also worried. "Patricia is vindictive," he warned me. "Be careful, she is going to come after you." He was right. 2 weeks after the contentious board meeting, I received a violation notice in the mail. Apparently my mailbox was not the correct shade of bronze. I would be fined $50 if I did not repaint it within 14 days. A week after that, I got another notice. My trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. Another $50 fine. Then it was my lawn. According to Patricia, there were weeds in my grass. Another fine. I was not the only one. Tom started getting violations too, so did Sarah and her husband. Patricia was targeting everyone who had questioned her at the meeting. She was even brazen enough to increase the monthly dues by another $25, claiming it was necessary to maintain community standards. The neighborhood was buzzing with anger. More people started showing up to the monthly meetings. At the May meeting, there were over 50 homeowners packed into the community center. Patricia looked nervous as she surveyed the crowd, but she put on her usual imperious front. When we got to the financial report, I raised my hand again. "I would like to make a motion to conduct an independent audit of the HOA finances." "Motion seconded," Tom called out immediately. Patricia's face went pale. "That is not necessary." "We have an accountant who reviews our books." "An accountant you hire," someone else shouted. "We want an independent audit." Richard looked like he might pass out. Donna had finally put down her phone and was staring at Patricia with wide eyes. Gary and Susan, the other board members, looked confused, like they had no idea what was happening. "All in favor of an independent audit," I called out. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Patricia tried to maintain control. "This is not how we conduct votes. There are procedures." "The procedures say that homeowners can call for a vote on major expenditures," Tom said, standing up. "I used to read governance documents for fun when I was a cop. I know the bylaws." "We have more than a quorum and the vote is clear. We want an audit." Patricia slammed her gavel. "This meeting is adjourned." "You cannot just adjourn when you do not like what is happening," someone yelled. But Patricia gathered her papers and stormed out, with Richard scurrying behind her. The rest of us stayed and talked. The energy in the room was electric. People were angry and they wanted answers. The next day, Patricia sent out an email to the entire community claiming that there was a small group of troublemakers trying to undermine the HOA board. She said that some people were spreading false rumors about financial mismanagement, and that legal action might be taken against those spreading defamatory statements. It was a transparent attempt at intimidation, and it backfired spectacularly. My inbox filled with messages from neighbors offering support and asking how they could help. Agent Rodriguez called me a few days later. We have been moving fast on this. I cannot give you all the details, but I wanted you to know we have traced the shell companies back to bank accounts controlled by Patricia Hendricks and Richard Bloom. We have also found evidence that Patricia used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, vacations, car payments, home renovations. It is all there. So what happens now? We are going to make arrests, soon. We wanted to give you a heads up because it is going to be very public. How public? We are executing the warrants at the next HOA board meeting. We want to catch them in the act of conducting HOA business, and we want the community to see that justice is being done. Be there, but do not tell anyone why. The June board meeting fell on a Thursday. I showed up early and found that the community center was packed. Word had spread that something big might happen, though no one knew exactly what. Tom saved me a seat in the third row. Sarah and her husband were there. I recognized faces of homeowners I had only seen in passing. Patricia walked in at exactly 7, looking irritated at the crowd. Richard was with her, sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. The other board members took their seats, and Patricia called the meeting to order. She launched into a lengthy speech about neighborhood standards and the importance of following rules. She talked about the rise in violations and the need for stricter enforcement. She was clearly trying to establish her authority in front of the crowd. Richard then presented the financial report, his voice shaky as he read numbers that I knew were completely fabricated. "Our reserve fund is strong," Richard said. "We have $187,000, which is adequate for our community's needs." I bit my tongue. Agent Rodriguez had told me not to engage, just to watch. Patricia opened the floor for new business. A homeowner raised a question about the pool heater, which had been broken for months. Patricia gave a dismissive answer about waiting for parts. Another person asked about the playground equipment, which was rusty and potentially dangerous. Patricia said it was on the list for next year's budget. Then the doors at the back of the community center opened. Agent Rodriguez walked in, followed by Agent Chang and 4 other FBI agents. They all wore dark suits with their badges clearly visible. The room went completely silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Richard dropped his papers. The other board members looked around in confusion. Agent Rodriguez walked straight up to the board table. "Patricia Hendricks, Richard Bloom, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and theft of funds. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs." "This is ridiculous," Patricia sputtered, but her voice had lost all its authority. "You cannot just barge in here and, we have warrants for your arrest and warrants to search HOA records," Agent Chang said calmly. "Please stand up." Richard started crying. Actual tears streaming down his face as he stood up with his hands raised. Patricia remained seated, her jaw set in defiance. 2 agents moved forward and physically lifted her from her chair. The click of handcuffs echoed through the silent room. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Rodriguez began, reading them their Miranda rights as agents cuffed both Patricia and Richard. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The entire room watched in stunned silence as the agents led Patricia and Richard out of the community center. Patricia tried to maintain some dignity, walking with her head high, but Richard was sobbing openly. As they were escorted past my row, Patricia's eyes met mine. The look she gave me was pure hatred, but I did not look away. After they were gone, Agent Rodriguez addressed the room. "I am Special Agent Daniel Rodriguez with the FBI. We have been conducting an investigation into HOA financial fraud. Patricia Hendricks and Richard Bloom are accused of stealing approximately $1.2 million in HOA dues over the past 4 years through fraudulent invoices, and shell companies. We will be conducting a thorough audit of all HOA accounts and records. If anyone has information relevant to this investigation, please contact our office. He handed out business cards and left with the other agents. The room exploded into conversation. People were shocked, angry, vindicated, confused. Tom grabbed my shoulder and squeezed it. "You did it, man. You actually did it." Sarah was hugging her husband, tears in her eyes. Other homeowners were coming up to me, shaking my hand, asking questions I could not really answer. It felt surreal. I had never imagined it would go this far, but seeing those handcuffs click shut on Patricia's wrists felt like justice. The investigation moved quickly after the arrests. The FBI seized Patricia's and Richard's financial records, and the evidence was overwhelming. Patricia had used HOA money to pay for a kitchen renovation that cost $80,000. She had taken 2 European vacations, totaling $35,000. She had made the down payment on her Mercedes with funds stolen from the community. Richard had been skimming smaller amounts, maybe $200,000 total, which he had used to pay off gambling debts. The shell companies were simple schemes. Patricia had created fake businesses with names that sounded legitimate. She would create invoices for services that were never performed, approve them as HOA president, and have Richard, as treasurer, issue checks. The checks went to accounts she controlled. She would then transfer the money to her personal accounts. It was not sophisticated, but it had worked for years because no one was paying attention. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested by FBI for $1 million fraud ran on every channel. Reporters showed up in Riverside Meadows, interviewing homeowners and filming the community center where the dramatic arrest had taken place. I declined interview requests, but Tom, former cop that he was, happily talked to reporters about the importance of oversight and accountability. The HOA had to hold an emergency election for new board members. With Patricia and Richard gone and the other 3 members resigning out of embarrassment, we needed fresh leadership. Tom was elected president. Sarah became treasurer. A retired teacher named Margaret Wu took on the secretary role. I was voted in as a board member, along with a guy named James who worked in construction and knew about property maintenance. Our first task was assessing the financial damage. An independent forensic audit confirmed what we had suspected. Over $1.2 million had been stolen over 4 years. The reserve fund was nearly empty. We had barely enough to cover basic operating expenses for the next few months. We need to figure out if we can recover any of this, Tom said at our first board meeting, which felt strange being on the other side of the table. Sarah had been working with the FBI and the bankruptcy trustee assigned to Patricia's and Richard's assets. Patricia's house has significant equity. The courts will force a sale. Her Mercedes will be seized and sold, same with Richard's assets. But even if we recover everything, we are probably looking at getting back maybe $500,000 tops. A lot of the money is just gone. What about insurance? James asked. Don't we have some kind of directors and officers insurance? Sarah nodded. We do, but there is a cap at $250,000 and there is a deductible. I am working on that claim now. I ran the numbers on my laptop. So worst case, we recover $750,000. That still leaves us about $450,000 short of where we should be. We will have to do a special assessment, Tom said grimly. Every homeowner is going to have to chip in to rebuild the reserve fund. The announcement went over about as well as expected. People were angry that they had to pay more money because of Patricia's and Richard's crimes. But the alternative was letting the community fall into disrepair, which would tank everyone's property values. We structured it as a 3-year assessment of $125 per month on top of regular dues. It was painful, but necessary. The criminal case moved through the federal system. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that the charges were overblown, that this was a civil matter blown out of proportion. But the evidence was too strong. In September, facing overwhelming proof of her crimes, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to wire fraud and money laundering in exchange for the prosecution dropping some of the lesser charges. Richard had already pled guilty in July and was cooperating fully with the investigation. His lawyer argued for leniency based on his cooperation and the fact that he had been under Patricia's influence. The prosecutor acknowledged his cooperation, but emphasized that he had been a willing participant in a massive fraud. The sentencing hearing was held in October at the Sandra Day O'Connor United States Courthouse in downtown Phoenix. I took the day off work to attend. The courtroom was packed with homeowners from Riverside Meadows. Patricia walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, having been denied bail due to flight risk. She had lost weight, and her perfect hair was now gray and disheveled. Richard was brought in separately, looking like a broken man. The prosecutor laid out the full scope of the crimes. Over $1.2 million stolen from 240 families. Money that was supposed to maintain their community and protect their investments. Money they had worked hard to earn. The prosecutor played recorded phone calls between Patricia and Richard, discussing how to create fake invoices. They showed bank records proving the money had gone directly into Patricia's accounts. Patricia's attorney argued that she had made mistakes, but that she was not a monster. He talked about her volunteer work and her previously clean record. He asked for a sentence of 3 to 5 years. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Sullivan, was not impressed. When it was time for victim impact statements, several homeowners spoke. A single mother talked about how she had scraped together money for HOA dues while working 2 jobs, only to find out it was stolen. A retired veteran on a fixed income explained how the special assessment was forcing him to make hard choices between medication and food. Tom spoke about the betrayal of trust, how Patricia had been elected to serve the community and had instead robbed it blind. The judge then asked Patricia if she wanted to speak. Patricia stood up, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize. Instead, she gave a defiant speech about how she had dedicated years to the HOA, how she had been unappreciated and overworked, how the community should be grateful for everything she had done. She barely acknowledged the theft, framing it as financial irregularities that had been misunderstood. Judge Sullivan's expression hardened. "Miss Hendricks, you have shown no genuine remorse for your crimes. You stole over $1 million from hardworking families who trusted you. You abused your position of authority for personal gain." This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, sustained fraud that lasted years. The judge sentenced Patricia to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $1.2 million plus interest. Patricia's face crumpled as the sentence was read. Her attorney immediately announced they would appeal, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. Richard was sentenced next. Thanks to his cooperation and his comparatively smaller role, he received 5 years in prison and was also ordered to pay restitution for his share of the theft. He apologized tearfully to the community, though it was hard to tell if the remorse was genuine or just an attempt to reduce his sentence. As the marshals led them away, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sadness that it had come to this, anger that it had happened at all. But mostly, I felt a sense of closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Tom gave a statement on behalf of the HOA board, emphasizing that this was a victory for accountability and transparency. He thanked the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for their work. He also made a point of mentioning that this all started because homeowners asked questions and demanded answers. "The lesson here is that oversight matters," Tom told the cameras. "Whether it is an HOA or any organization handling other people's money, there need to be checks and balances. When something does not look right, speak up. Ask questions. Do not assume someone else is paying attention." Life in Riverside Meadows slowly returned to normal over the following months. The new board worked hard to rebuild trust. We instituted quarterly financial reviews with an independent auditor. We created a financial oversight committee made up of homeowners with accounting and legal backgrounds. We made all financial records easily accessible online. We wanted to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. The asset seizures and insurance recovery brought in about $800,000 by early 2024. It was not everything, but it was significant. We were able to reduce the special assessment and start making real improvements to the community. We replaced the pool furniture, fixed the playground equipment, updated the landscaping. It felt good to actually see our dues being used properly. I got a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office in November thanking me for my role in bringing the fraud to light. Agent Rodriguez called to tell me that this case had been used as a training example for other agents investigating financial crimes. Apparently, HOA fraud was more common than most people realized, and our case had shown how effective homeowner vigilance could be. Sarah and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We occasionally met for coffee to joke about how we never imagined we would become HOA activists. Tom thrived as HOA president, bringing his cop mentality to community management. He actually made the meetings interesting and kept everything running efficiently. As for me, I learned that paying attention matters. I learned that asking questions, even when it is uncomfortable, is important. I learned that most people are honest, but the few who are not can do tremendous damage if left unchecked. And I learned that standing up for what is right, even in something as mundane as an HOA dispute, can make a real difference. The appeals process dragged on for months, but ultimately, both Patricia's and Richard's sentences were upheld. Patricia's attempt to reduce her sentence was rejected by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in mid-2024. She was transferred to a federal prison in California to serve her time. Richard ended up in a facility in Texas. I still live in Riverside Meadows. My house has appreciated in value now that the community is properly maintained. The pool is nice. The common areas look great. The monthly board meetings are well attended and transparent. We actually have a waiting list of people who want to buy homes in the neighborhood, which would have seemed impossible during the Patricia era. Every now and then, when I am grilling in my backyard or swimming in the pool, I think about that first conversation with Tom. How a simple question about missing money turned into a federal case. How close Patricia came to getting away with it because most people were not paying attention. How much worse it could have gotten if we had not acted. There was one more twist in the story that came in late 2024. During the FBI's investigation, they had discovered that Patricia had been communicating with HOA board members in other communities, apparently sharing tips on how to manipulate financial records. This led to investigations in 3 other Phoenix area HOAs. 2 of those investigations resulted in arrests. It turned out Patricia had not just been stealing from us. She had been part of a loose network of corrupt HOA officials who shared techniques and advice. This wider conspiracy added more charges and more victims. The U.S. Attorney announced in January 2025 that they were prosecuting a multi-community HOA fraud case involving over $3 million. Patricia's sentence could potentially be extended, though she was already facing 12 years. The revelation that this was bigger than just our community was shocking, but it also validated everything we had done. If we had not acted, if we had just accepted Patricia's dismissive answers, she would have continued stealing, and the network would have kept operating. The whole experience changed how I look at civic engagement. I used to think HOA politics were petty and boring. I never bothered to vote in HOA elections or attend meetings. I just paid my dues and assumed someone else was handling things. That indifference, multiplied across hundreds of homeowners, created the environment where Patricia could operate freely for years. Now I pay attention. I read the financial reports every month. I attend most board meetings. I ask questions when something does not make sense, and I encourage my neighbors to do the same. We have a saying now in Riverside Meadows: trust, but verify. We trust our board members to do their jobs, but we also verify that they are doing them correctly. Tom termed out as president after 2 years, per our new term limit rules we put in the bylaws. Sarah took over as president, and she has been excellent. We elected new board members who actually care about the community. The culture has completely changed from the Patricia days. Instead of an imperious dictator making unilateral decisions, we have a collaborative board that genuinely seeks input from homeowners. The financial assessment ended in early 2026, right around the time I am telling this story. Our reserve fund is back to healthy levels. We have a 10-year capital improvement plan that is actually funded. We have competitive bids from contractors for all major work, and everything is transparent and documented. It is boring in the best possible way. I ran into one of Patricia's old supporters at the grocery store last month, a woman named Diane who used to defend Patricia at meetings. She apologized for not believing me when I first raised concerns. "I just thought you were being difficult," she admitted. "I didn't want to think Patricia could do something like that." I trusted her because she seemed so confident and competent. I understood. Patricia had been good at what she did, which was manipulation and deception. She had cultivated an image of authority and competence that made people defer to her. She had silenced dissent with intimidation and procedural tactics. She had counted on people's apathy and their willingness to accept easy answers, but she had also gotten sloppy, arrogant, and greedy. The Mercedes was a mistake. The dramatic increase in personal spending was a mistake. If she had stolen smaller amounts and maintained a lower profile, she might have gotten away with it for much longer. Her downfall was as much about her hubris as it was about our vigilance. I think about what I would tell someone who suspects financial irregularities in their HOA or any organization. First, trust your instincts. If the numbers do not make sense, there is probably a reason. Second, do the homework. Get the documents, build the case, understand what you are looking at before you make accusations. Third, find allies. I could not have done this alone. Tom, Sarah, and many others were crucial to seeing this through. Fourth, be prepared for resistance. People in power do not like being questioned, and they will fight back. Finally, know when to escalate. We tried handling it within the HOA first, but when it became clear this was criminal, we went to the proper authorities. The FBI agents who worked our case told us that HOA fraud is vastly underreported. Many homeowners do not know they can demand financial records. Many do not have the expertise to analyze what they are seeing. Many are intimidated by board members or worried about retaliation. And many just do not care enough to invest the time and energy into investigating. But when HOA fraud happens, it hurts real people. It is not some victimless white-collar crime. It is families who are struggling to pay dues that are being stolen. It is communities that deteriorate because money that should go to maintenance is being diverted. It is property values that decline because the neighborhood looks run down. The victims are your neighbors, your friends, maybe yourself. I am proud of what our community accomplished. We took back our HOA from criminals who were exploiting it. We reformed our systems to prevent future fraud. We built a culture of transparency and accountability. And we sent a message that homeowners are not passive victims who will accept being robbed. The story made national news when it first happened, and I have been contacted by homeowners from across the country who suspect similar problems in their communities. I always tell them the same thing. Document everything, seek professional help if needed, and do not be afraid to involve law enforcement if crimes have been committed. The FBI takes financial fraud seriously, especially when the amounts are substantial. As I write this in March 2026, Patricia is about halfway through her sentence. She will be in prison until around 2034 if she serves her full term, though she might get out earlier with good behavior. Richard is looking at release around 2028. Neither has paid any significant restitution yet, as they simply do not have the assets to cover what they stole. We might never recover everything, but at least they are facing consequences. The Riverside Meadows HOA is now a model for other communities. We have been featured in HOA management publications and have shared our story at community management conferences. Our bylaws and oversight procedures have been copied by other associations looking to prevent fraud. Something good came out of something terrible. I still work as an accountant downtown. I still grill burgers in my backyard. I still swim in the community pool. But I am also the guy who helped take down a $1 million fraud scheme, and that is not something I ever expected to add to my resume. Life is strange that way. You never know when paying attention to details and asking uncomfortable questions will lead to handcuffs clicking shut and justice being served. The best part is the community itself. We went through something difficult together, and it brought us closer. We have neighborhood barbecues now where people actually show up and talk to each other. We have a sense of shared ownership and pride in Riverside Meadows. We proved that ordinary people working together can hold the powerful accountable and create real change. Tom still comes over for beers and grilling, though now we talk about normal things like sports and grandkids instead of financial fraud. Sarah and her husband bought a bigger house in the neighborhood because they love the community so much. New families move in and hear the story, usually with disbelief, and we show them the news articles and the court documents to prove it really happened. Every time I drive past the community center where the FBI walked in with handcuffs ready, I smile. That moment was the culmination of months of work, stress, and uncertainty. Seeing Patricia and Richard led away in handcuffs, seeing justice actually happen in real time, was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was right. They had stolen from hundreds of families, and they were finally being held accountable. I hope I never have to investigate fraud again. I hope our reformed systems and oversight procedures mean nothing like this can happen in Riverside Meadows again. But if something similar ever does happen, I know this community will not stay silent. We learned our lesson. We learned that vigilance matters, that questions should be answered, that trust must be earned and verified. That Tuesday evening when Tom walked over with a beer and a question about missing money changed everything. It started as curiosity, became an investigation, turned into a federal case, and ended with justice. It was not easy, and there were times I wondered if it was worth the stress and conflict. But standing in that courtroom watching the judge hand down those sentences, knowing that we had protected our community and prevented future theft, made every difficult moment worth it. We did not set out to be heroes, we just wanted to know where our money went. But sometimes asking the right question at the right time can change everything. Sometimes one person noticing something wrong and refusing to let it go can unravel an entire criminal enterprise. Sometimes ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. The HOA board meetings are still held on the third Thursday of every month at 7 in the evening. They are well attended, transparent, and occasionally even interesting. The financial reports are detailed and clear. The reserve fund is healthy, the community looks beautiful. And every single dollar of HOA dues is accounted for, documented, and used for its intended purpose. That is what victory looks like. Not dramatic or flashy, just a functional, honest system serving the community it was created to serve. Sometimes the best outcome is boring competence instead of criminal excitement. I will take boring and honest over dramatic and corrupt any day of the week. And if I ever move to a new neighborhood, you better believe I will be rating those financial statements carefully from day one. Once you have seen how bad it can get, you never take proper governance for granted again. Patricia and Richard taught us an expensive lesson, but it was a lesson we learned well. Trust, but verify. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Pay attention. Because somewhere out there in HOAs across America, there are other Patricias running similar schemes. There are homeowners paying dues that disappear into fake companies and personal bank accounts. There are communities being robbed blind by people who were elected to serve them. And the only way to stop it is for people to care enough to ask questions and demand answers. I never thought I would be the guy who cared about HOA meetings. But when $1 million disappears and your neighborhood deteriorates while the HOA president drives a new Mercedes, you start caring real quick. And when you care enough to dig deeper, to ask uncomfortable questions, to involve the authorities when necessary, amazing things can happen. Like FBI agents walking into a board meeting with handcuffs ready, justice being served, and a community reclaiming what was stolen. That is a story worth telling, and I am glad it is my story to tell.